Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be learning with you here again at Drisha. Um, this is Genesis to Exodus from Family to Nation with Rabbi Silber. As you come into the Zoom room, I will invite you to become a panelist. You should accept that invitation, and it just means you can choose to turn your camera on if you wish, so we can see your wonderful faces, or when Rabbi Silber invites questions and comments, that you can unmute and ask or comment yourself. We just ask that when you're not speaking, you stay on mute, just so that it minimizes background noise and everyone can hear each other. Questions and comments are always welcome in the Zoom chat, or if you're joining us on Facebook Live, in the Facebook comments. I will be sharing the sources on screen, but you are very welcome to follow along in your own Tanakh at home. And with that, over to Rabbi Silber.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we are moving towards the end of Breshit. We almost finished chapter 48. The very end of chapter 48. As you certainly remember, Yaakov is in this chapter blessing his son, Yosef. Only Yosef is with him, together with Yosef's two sons, Menashe and Ephraim. And what Yaakov does is he blesses Menashe and Ephraim. He asks Yosef to hand over Menashe and Ephraim to him. And Yosef places Menashe and Ephraim, Menashe to the right of Yaakov and Ephraim to his left, with Yaakov switches his hands and he places his right hand on the head of Ephraim and his left hand on the head of Menashe, and he blesses them. And Yosef objects. Perhaps he thinks his father's making a mistake, doesn't know what he's doing, and Yaakov assures him that he does know. What we spoke about, among many other things, is that the Chumash actually sets it up in such a way that the reader is wondering how much he knows. For example, we're told Yaakov can't see, and Yaakov more than once says, "Oh, I didn't think I would see you. I even can see your sons." But I thought he can see. And on top of all that, of course, the story that is reminded when we read the story of Yaakov blessing in his old age, blessing Yosef, or blessing Menashe and Ephraim, it calls to mind the story of Yitzchak blessing Yaakov, whom he thinks is Esau. A lot of the language is the same language as we spoke. And then once again, we, the reader, are wondering, and Yosef certainly is wondering, does Yaakov really know what he's doing? Does Yaakov have full understanding? And then we have that surprise ending. Yaakov tries to move his father's hands to the right hand to the head of Menashe. And we spoke about that, why Yosef favors Menashe, Yaakov favors Ephraim. But the Yaakov says, Yodati ben Yodati. No, I know exactly what I'm doing. And that is a incredibly important phrase in the book of Breshit and Shemot as well. The idea of knowledge. Torah begins with the story of knowledge, the tree of knowledge. The theme of knowledge runs through all of Sefer Breshit and certainly Sefer Shemot. And Yaakov, who earlier had said when he ran away from home, Anochi lo yadati. I didn't realize, Yaakov said when he had his dream in chapter 28, I didn't realize I'm in this sacred place. I didn't realize the nature of the place. I didn't realize the nature of the communication. He takes a vow to return, lo yadati. But over here, towards the end of his life, is Yodati ben Yodati. And the point, of course, is that he blesses Menashe and Ephraim, but the Chumash says, Vayivarech et Yosef. He blesses Yosef. In other words, he includes Yosef through Menashe and Ephraim. The question that the reader has had, or should have anyway, the nature of Yosef. Is Yosef an Egyptian? Is Yosef a Jew? And what Yaakov's mission, among other things, is to make sure Yosef's included. He includes Yosef through Menashe and Ephraim, and in doing so, and we'll come to this last verse in chapter 48, he not only includes Yosef in the family, but he actually gives Yosef an extra portion. The extra portion, because Yosef is not one tribe, Yosef is two tribes. And we know from elsewhere in the Chumash that the Bechor, the firstborn, gets an additional portion. So over here, there are 12 sons, but there are 13 portions. Because the oldest one is to get a double portion. And the oldest one is, of course, Reuven, but already in chapter 48, before we get to chapter 49, what Yaakov has done, in effect, is to give Joseph the right of the firstborn. Joseph, in fact, is the firstborn. I mean, he's the firstborn to Rachel, the woman he wanted to marry first. Actually, the only woman he wanted to marry. So Joseph is by right a firstborn, but here he's given the primacy in terms of the whole family. He's still the second youngest in the family. But Joseph gets the right of the firstborn. And what I added in our study is that it's Yaakov's way of actually including Yosef, because Yosef is problematic in terms of his relationship to the other brothers. Yes, he took care of them. Yes, he seems to have forgiven them. But at the very end of the Chumash, we discover they still don't trust him. There's always some kind of tension between Yosef and the brothers. So by virtue of including Menashe and Ephraim, there is no tribe of Joseph, actually. There's Menashe and Ephraim. And that's the way that Yaakov can, in fact, include, by including his grandchildren, making his grandchildren two tribes. He also includes their father. He includes Yosef, and we spoke as well, just to summarize, about a parallel story in Sefer Bereshit of great importance, and that's the story of Judah and Tamar. In that story also we have a grandfather, Judah, who is fathering, as it were, his grandchildren, or also his children, because Tamar is his daughter-in-law, but also the woman who bears the twins. And in that story, both of the twins have to be included, because each one is a replacement for one of the two sons that Judah lost, one of the two husbands that Tamar lost. So that's a story where two siblings, by definition, are going to be included. And Menashe and Ephraim, we have a parallel story. There too is the grandfather, who says, I adopted them as my children. That's what Yaakov said. Ephraim Menashe kiruven v'shilon yiyuli. So we have a model of inclusion. And just to remind ourselves that in this book, what Yaakov represents, he may even be the main character of the book. But Yaakov took a vow back in chapter 28, when he had that dream, that if you bring me back to the land, you will be my God. We interpreted at the time that what Yaakov means is, you're the God of my father, the God of my grandfather, and by that, you're also my God. But if you allow me to return safely, I will build the house of God, the Bayit. In this book, the Bayit represents the family. Jacob calls his family his Bayit. So what Yaakov is saying is, unlike my father, unlike my grandfather, who passed on a blessing, but only to one of his children. The other one was not covenantal. Yishmael is not covenantal. Esav is not covenantal. They have blessings, but not the covenantal blessing. But as far as I'm concerned, says Yaakov, my vision is to build a family where every single one in the family can be included in my covenantal blessing. So the odd man out, as it were, is Yosef. He was sold into slavery and separated from the family for a very long time. He's the viceroy of Egypt. So Yaakov has to find a way to include him in order to fulfill Yaakov's own vision, his own dream of a kind of inclusive community. And Yaakov succeeds in doing that in chapter 48. And now in chapter 49, that will come too soon, he will bless all of his sons. They don't all get the same blessing, but the important point of chapter 49 is that everyone is included. No one is accepted. And in fact, in chapter 49, in verse number 28, Kol Eila Shiftei Yisrael Shnei Masar. These are the 12 tribes of Israel. V'zot asher diber lahem avihem, vayavarech otam, ish asher kivirchato beirach otam. This is what their father said to them, the blessing that he gave them, each one according to his blessing. So the Torah makes it clear these are very different blessings, and some of them are more critiques than blessings, but the Torah calls them all blessings because they're all included. There is nobody who's not included. They may have different roles, they occupy different places and different spaces, but they're all included. So we have in these blessings a fulfillment of Yaakov's vision and Yaakov's hope, Yaakov's commitment to building this community, this family in which no one is actually excluded. Before we get to chapter 49, let me just complete chapter 48, the last two verses, and then I'll stop and take some comments and questions, and then we'll start with chapter 49. So chapter 48, in the next to last pasuk, which is 21, Vayomer Yisrael El Yosef Hinei Anochi Met. So Yisrael, Yaakov says to Yosef, I am about to die. Voya Elohim imochem, but God should be with you. Ve'shiv etchem el eretz avotechem, and bring you back to the land of your forefathers. Eretz avotechem. Remember that when Yaakov blessed Menashe and Ephraim, the first thing Yaakov says is, or the first thing Yaakov says, Elohim Asher, it is the first thing. Asher hitachu avotai lefanav Abraham v'Yitzchak. I bless you in the name of the God before whom my ancestors, Abraham and Yitzchak, walked. And in the next verse, in verse number 16, Yaakov says about Menashe and Ephraim, in them shall my name be called, and the name of Abraham and my ancestors, my father, grandfather, Abraham and Yitzchak. So Yaakov, in the two verses that he blesses, Menashe and Ephraim, twice he mentions Abraham and Yitzchak, and of course himself, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The point being that what he's emphasizing over here is not just that God will bring you back someday to the land of your ancestors, which Yaakov himself, after his death, will be returned. That's what Yaakov made Yosef swear. Bring me back to the family grave, to my ancestors. But he's also, I think, indirectly, and not so indirectly, talking to Yosef. Yosef had named his first son Menashe, for he said, I want to forget my father's house. And what Yaakov says to Yosef, in effect, is, you can't forget your father's house. You have to return to your father's house, just as I am returning after my death. So someday your descendants will return to the land of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's the message that he's giving Yosef through the blessing of Menashe and Ephraim. He repeats it at the very end, and then he adds something else. In the last verse of chapter 48 is Vani natati lucha shchem achad alachecha asher lakachti miyad emori. That's a very interesting verse. So I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes on this last verse of chapter 48. Yaakov says to Yosef, I have given you Shechem Achad Alachecha. The question is, what does Shechem mean? So it's often translated as an extra portion. Here they have the portion. I assign to you one portion more than to your brothers, an extra portion. As I said, that's the right of the firstborn. But the word Shechem in the book of Bereshit, as is typical of the way these books work, the word Shechem has very special meaning. It means a shoulder or back. But of course, Shechem is a place. It's the place to which Yaakov sends Yosef, and Yosef can't find his brothers in Shechem. Some mysterious person sends him off elsewhere, where Yosef is eventually sold into slavery. And of course, Shechem, there's a whole chapter about Shechem in the story of Shimon and Levi, who tricked the people of Shechem and massacred the town of Shechem and rescued their sister Dinah. So the word Shechem has a resonance throughout the book of Bereshit. So and we know from the book of Yoshua that actually Yosef is buried in Shechem, that the town of Shechem, which is a very significant town in the Bible in general, in the Torah and beyond, is Joseph's town. So Yaakov is saying over here, I give you an extra Shechem alachecha, but clearly there's an allusion to the fact that Yosef is given Shechem, and that's the town that Yosef was sent to find his brothers. As if to say that after many years later, he will find his brothers, reunite with his brothers fully in Shechem. So, but what does it mean, which I took from Asher Lakachti, which I took from the Emori, Bicharbi Uvakashti? So here there's an interesting question. Does he mean I took it from them? Is he alluding to the story of Shimon and Levi and the massacre of Shechem? Is that what he's saying? And in some sense, he's saying that even though Yaakov criticized Shimon and Levi in chapter 34, and will criticize them again in chapter 49 very harshly, is he saying perhaps they didn't do the right thing, but in effect, the Shechem was, and this Shechem, I give to you, Joseph. Either the city of Shem is the primary significance or alluded to. That's one possibility. That what Yaakov is referring to, I mean, the word Shem is a loaded word. He's referring to that event. That's one possibility. Or maybe Yaakov is saying something else, which is my inclination, and that is that sometimes in biblical Hebrew, the past tense refers to the future because it's a future which is definite. Sometimes in biblical Hebrew, something that is presented in the past tense does not mean the past. It means I will do it, but like we say in English, it's as good as done. You have this actually in Sefer Bereshit earlier, when Avram speaks to Bnei Chet, when he wants to purchase the gravesite for Sarah, and not just the gravesite for Sarah, an acquisition in the land. Yaakov says to Ephron, "Natati kesef hasadeh kach mimeni." Natati, I have given you the money, take it from me. To which you might ask, well, if you already gave it, what does it mean, take it from me? Kach mimeni means in the future. But he says, Natati, I gave you the money. So clearly he hasn't given him the money yet. What Avram is saying is, no, I've determined to give you the money. You say I can have it for nothing. I can't have it for nothing. So the money is as good as given. So the Torah uses the past tense, but it's as good as given. So therefore, he will give it in the future. Kach mimeni, take it. But it's natati. So here, Yaakov may be saying something else, which I believe he's saying. I will give you an extra portion in the land that I will capture from the Amori with my son. Many years from now, there'll be a war. We will capture this land with my sword, with my bow. There'll be a war. I'll capture the land. And in that land that will be captured, I will give you an extra portion. And here, this I believe is the better interpretation of the verse, in my view. And here there's something very interesting about what Yaakov says. I talked a bit about the word Shem, which clearly is a loaded word, but there's another word here, which is very significant. The land that I will take someday, I give you an extra portion in that land. The land which Yaakov's descendants will capture someday, will possess someday, is typically called in the Torah Eretz Canaan, the land of the Canaanites. Even though in the land of the Canaanites are one of 7 nations, or perhaps one of 10 nations, but it's typically referred to generically as Eretz Canaan. However, that's not always the case. Sometimes it's referred to as Eretz Emori, the land of the Amori. It's a different one of the 7 nations. And in particular, now over here, Yaakov refers to the land of Canaan as Yada Emori, from the Amori. But if you remember back in chapter 15, when we have the covenant of the pieces, the Brit Ben Habitarim, and God speaks to Abraham, God said to Abraham, the 4th generation shall return to the land. For the sin of the Amori is not complete. In other words, the people living in the land can't be dispossessed, even though they misbehave. But their misbehavior has not reached the point where I have to banish them from the land. But has to wait 4 generations, and then the sin of the Amori, chapter 15, will be complete. So in the covenant of the land, it's very striking that God, when God speaks of the land of Canaan, promised land, covenantal land, God, when God speaks to Abraham, doesn't call it Eretz Canaani. God calls it generically Eretz Emori. When we studied that chapter, and we studied it many times, I pointed out that actually that promise of the land in chapter 15, the Brit Ben Abitarim, is related to the previous chapter, chapter 14, which describes a conquest of the land by 4 kings. And Avram then goes to war and saves the captives. He saves the captives. And in saving the captives and defeating those that captured the land, he is symbolically possessing the land. One of the nations that's captured, the giants that he captured, is also the Emori is mentioned specifically as representing Canaan in chapter 14. So therefore, what Yaakov is doing over here, what the Chumash is doing over here, is saying, having Yaakov say, listen, I'm going to give you an extra portion in the land. It's not any land. It's not any old land. It's the covenantal land. It's the land that was promised to my grandfather and his descendants back in chapter 15, where God said to Abraham that the fourth generation shall return to the land. The land of the Amori is not, you can't take it yet until you're looking at chapter 14 on the screen over there. It would be earlier in chapter 14. It's earlier, but it describes, 1 second. Let's see a little more. Let's see, 1 second. Keep it down more slowly, down more, down. Down more. Stop a second. Down a little more. There it is. First number, whatever that number is. Vayashuvu vayol ein mishpati kadesh. Vayakud kos Amoriki. V'gama to Amori. Hayoshe b'chatzatzon tamar. So the Torah goes out of its way to mention Amori amongst the other nations, the giants, the powerful ones. Amalek is mentioned there. The list is very striking. So what Yaakov is alluding to is the covenant. I give you an extra portion in the covenantal land. And that's why he insists so much on going to that land. It's the promised land. It's not any land. And in that promised land, Yosef, who named your first son Menashe, and who thinks Menashe is primary even at this point. No. Ephraim is primary. They get the same blessing. They're both the same. But you must return to that land. I give you an extra portion. And now there's something else about the verse. When you read this verse in the light of the whole book of Genesis, because we remember something else about Shem. I've given you a Shem Achad. It means a portion, but there is an allusion to Shem. And Shem has another significance in the book of Genesis, great significance. Shem is the place in Genesis in which you enter the land. It's the port of entry. When Avram is told, Lechucha, we just read it this week, Lechucha me'artzecha, go to the place that I will show you. And Avram travels and he comes to Shem. And God says to Avram, I'm going to give you this land. Shem is where Avram enters the land. That's where he enters the land. And when Yaakov runs away to the house of Laban, fleeing from his brother and finding a wife, and he returns. And where does Yaakov return to? He returns to Shem. He promised to see his father in Hebron, but he goes to Shem first. Shem and then Beit El and then Hebron, exactly as Avram does in this book. Avram enters the land at Shem. So over here, Shem Achadu Achecha, what Yaakov is saying is, I want you to return to the land. The port of entry is Shem. That's why when Yosef can't find the brothers in Shem, and he's sent away, he sent from Hebron to Shem, the Chumash said in chapter 37. But if you miss the stop at Shem, what's the next stop? Outside the land. Because Shem is the place you enter. The order in this book is Shem, Beit El, and Hebron. But Yaakov said to Yosef from Emek Hebron to Shem, opposite. And he misses the brothers. He arrived too late. The train has left. And where are you? You're already outside. So that's the great significance of Shem over here. But again, to reinforce the point, what Yaakov is saying to Yosef, in no uncertain terms, your destiny is with your ancestors, with your people. Mitzrayim, okay, that's a temporary situation. You take care of the family, we all appreciate it. That's not where your destiny lies. Your destiny lies in the land of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Your destiny, and you have to return there. Entry point is Shem. And I give you an extra portion in the land that someday I will capture, my descendants will capture, will in the future capture. It's good as done. But it will happen in the future that we will capture the Amori, the land of Canaan, Bicharbi Uvakashti. Interesting, by the way, this is possible. I don't know if this is another illusion in these texts. It's like great music. There's so many illusions here. But Charbi Uvakashti is very striking because in this book of Genesis, which is about the covenant that's given to Abraham and then Yitzchak and Yaakov, but there were two other, one might say, covenantal pretenders. One is Yishmael, and the other is
and
Esav.
Esav.
Yishmael is the son who's not chosen, and Esav is the son who's not chosen covenantally. What does Yishmael do in the desert? What does the Chumash say? Vayhi rovek Hashem. He's an archer. He shoots the bows and arrows. Esav, what's Esav's blessing that he's given? You live by the sword. So I give you the land, which I will take b'charbi uv'kashti, is a way of saying, in effect, reinforcing the fact that this is your covenantal land. It's not Yishmael, and it's not Esav, but all the cherev and the keshet will be used in the future to secure the land of the Amori, which God promised Abraham. And that's where you have to go back. You have to return there, and God should bring you back to that place. Okay, I just wanted to conclude chapter 48. And now I'll stop and take any comments or questions, and then we'll start with chapter 49.
I had a question.
Yes.
You compared Yehuda and Yaakov, but I think the Torah goes out of its way to say that Yaakov has a real connection with his kids. And I think the Torah also goes out of its way to say that Yehuda, I don't think he was involved.
Yehuda or Yosef you're talking about?
Yehuda with Tamar and the two.
Yes. Oh, yes, of course, right. Yes, I did, right. I only compared in the sense, they're totally different, but I compared in the sense that you have the first time in the Chumash that two siblings are both included. But when you think about the Chumash, that's my comparison. I'm not comparing it in other ways. I'm just saying that in the Chumash, the story of Yehuda and Tamar is the first time we have a situation of two siblings, both of whom by definition are included. And that's chapter 38. It comes right after the story of Yosef, which is the ultimate breakup of the family. And now in chapter 38, the Chumash has chapter 38 prior to the rest of the Joseph story to say it's not impossible to build a nation where different people can get along and be part of the same nation. It is theoretically possible. The way it takes place in the story of Yehuda and Tamar, Yehuda is the catalyst in the sense that what he does, it only works in Yehuda and Tamar if at the end of the story Yehuda can say, I've done the wrong thing, Tzad Kamimeni, and I'm responsible. So there's taking responsibility, there's confession, and that's what leadership is about. And that's the way one can, in fact, build such a family. And that in that case, the parallel in the case of Menashe and Ephraim is Yaakov taking responsibility for the family. He comes down, he understands that Yosef is on the outs, and he sees Yosef. Who are these kids? He says, what is this? And he finds a way to not just include Yosef, but to include Yosef, both of his children, and by doing so, giving Yosef the extra portion. I did not mean to insinuate or suggest that there may be other parallels between Yaakov and Yehuda, but there are others. But the two stories are very different, of course. We don't have to see any connection per se between Yehuda and Peretz and Zerach in the Chumash, none whatsoever. Whereas Yaakov, of course, has deep connections to all his children, to Yosef and all the others. He's about to bless all of his sons. Now, correct, I totally agree with that, right?
Rabbi Silber, the speaking is a little muddled. I don't know if it has to do with the microphone. Just asking if you could make a little more clarity. I don't know.
Well, I'm doing my best in terms of the clarity, but I don't think it's the, I don't know what the issue is.
I can hear you reasonably clearly, Rose. I wonder if it's your internet connection.
Yeah, it could be. I think it's clear. From this end, it's pretty clear, I think. All right, anybody else have a comment or question?
So the Targum interprets and renders Harbi Ukashti as prayer and petition.
Yes, it does.
So it would seem like yes, yes. So I don't have it in front of me, but it's very stark, and it seems like the tradition is trying to mitigate the parallels that you had made between Ishmael and Esav, that we've got some other approach other than exactly sword and bow.
Could be so. Could be that the Targum, yes, that is certainly possible that, or maybe the Targum doesn't see Yaakov per se as a warrior. I mean, Yaakov actually, in the Chumash, unlike Avraham, who actually fights a battle, when Yaakov doesn't capture Shechem by force, quite the opposite. At the end of chapter 33, Yaakov buys a plot of land outside Shechem. But famously, the Targum does say, I don't have it in front of me either, but it's a very famous Targum, Pitsuruti Uvauti. What I read many years ago about Pitsuruti Uvauti is this, that they're both one's prayer and petition. And the difference between them, I forget who says this, it's a nice drush though, that Pitsuruti Uvauti, a sword, you kill somebody with a sword, so it's sort of you just wave the sword, you kill people with it. But an arrow is different. An arrow is you're pointing specifically. An arrow hits the person at one particular point. A sword renders damage more generally. And in terms of prayer, there are two kinds of prayers. Sometimes we have general prayers. Nothing specific in mind necessarily, but we're generally speaking, purify us, so that would enable us to serve you properly. The Sabbath requests are very general. Sabeinu mituvecha, samchenu bishuatecha, tari beinu yavdecha be'emet, v'tzevach litzenu. But then, during the week, and sometimes even on Shabbat, we have very specific situations, specific requests. So that saluti and va'uti are two different kinds of prayer. One is very specific. That's the arrow. That's the bow and arrow. We're asking for something very specific, some kind of a crisis. We're very focused. And sometimes our prayers are very general prayers. Help us in general. I have nothing specific to request, but I'm unhappy with where I am. Want to be in a better place. So they say that is the charbi. Charbi is the general request of prayer that we often have, but pa'uti is sometimes the need for special requests, special situations. But thanks for pointing that out. That is, yes, the famous Targum on, and perhaps the Targum is, wants to present Yaakov differently, but the simple pshat in the Chumash, of course, is my sword and my bow, and that the reference, I think, to Yishmael and Esav, I think, is pretty clear. Anybody else? Okay, if not, we will continue. So let's now, new chapter 49. Okay, chapter 49. Okay, chapter 49 is a clear example in the Torah of biblical poetry. That's for sure. And it is as much of biblical poetry. So a lot of the words are very difficult. It's very hard to know exactly what the clear intention is. That's true of the blessing which appears towards the end of Breshit, next to the last chapter in Breshit. And it's certainly true of the parallel, which are the blessings at the end of the Chumash. Zot HaBracha, that we read on Simchat Torah, Shmini Atzeret Simchat Torah, here it's Simchat Torah. And those are blessings that Moshe blesses all of the tribes. And the other language is exceedingly difficult. Many of the words appear only there in that one place in the Bible. So biblical poetry, and we know from other biblical poetry, whether Eov, which is incredibly difficult, Yeshayahu, that's a challenge to understand exactly what is being suggested by the verses. But it is striking to note that both the Torah in general and the book of Genesis in particular end up with blessings. In this case, it's the next to last chapter. And in the Torah, it's actually the very end of the Torah. The book of Dvarim, which fundamentally Moshe, for most of the time, when he's not teaching us new laws, is busy criticizing and castigating the Jewish people. But at the very end, after all the criticisms, he leaves us with blessings. So here too as well. Now, so we do have that very striking parallel between the blessings of Moshe to the tribes of Israel at the end of the Torah and the blessings of Jacob to his sons in chapter 49. And what's interesting is, as a general proposition, very interesting, the Ramban notes this in more than one place in his commentary on the Torah. And anybody who studied the Chumash knows this, that for whatever reason, when the blessings are handed out in the Torah, there are always 12. When the tribes are mentioned, there are always 12 tribes. And the problem is that there are actually 13 tribes. There are 13 because there were 2 tribes of Joseph. So the 12 sons of Jacob become 13 tribes, 13 sons. So typically, something has to be left out. And the two simplest ways to leave something out would be to count Joseph as one in the list, or to leave out one of the tribes. And typically the tribe that we left out would be the tribe of Levi. So for example, when the tribes are counted in the book of Bamidbar, the Torah makes the point, count all the tribes, all 12, but Achat Matei Levi Lo Tifkol. The Levites are counted separately. So there are 12. When you come to Zota Bracha, it's very striking. There Yaakov mentions Menashe and Yaakov. Moshe mentions when Moshe blesses the tribe of Joseph, Moshe mentions the V'heim Rivavot Ephraim, V'heim Alfei Menashe. So in the blessing to Joseph in Zota Bracha, at the end of the Chumash, it mentions both Menashe and it mentions Ephraim. So then you have 13. But actually, when you look at Zota Bracha, and it's not obvious, but when you read the blessings of Moshe at the end of the Torah, there are also only 12. Because there's one tribe that's missing. Shimon is not there. There's no blessing to Shimon. There is an allusion to Shimon, I believe, but Shimon is actually not mentioned. Very striking. Though it's alluded to, that's not our topic now, but I'm simply pointing out that there are 12. I mention that because in the blessings of chapter 49, when Yaakov blesses his sons, he does bless Joseph, and he doesn't mention Menashe and Ephraim. He mentioned Menashe and Ephraim back in 48, in the chapter we completed. But in 49, he gives a blessing to Joseph, and he gives a big blessing to Joseph, and he doesn't, unlike Moshe, in Zota Bracha, he doesn't mention Menashe and Ephraim. So we always have 12. Now, once again, before we begin over here, so we end with blessing. That's an important point. The Torah, and in general, we have such a tradition. Even in those books that end on a sort of a sour note, we tend to repeat a prior verse. We don't want to end on a negative note. We always want to end on a positive note. So here in the book of Genesis, we have a sense over here in this chapter that Yaakov's vision has been fulfilled. Namely, he's been able to bless all of his sons. Unlike Yitzchak, for example, it's one or the other. It can't be both. They can't share a blessing. They can have a blessing that sometimes one has it, sometimes the other one has it, but they're separate. And here they are all together. So that's a very important point about chapter 49. And we're not going to go through some very difficult verses here, but let's begin anyway with chapter 49. Vayikra Yaakov el banav, vayomer, heyasvu v'yagidu lachem et asher yikra etchem v'yacharit hayamim. He gathers all of his sons and he says, gather together, and let me tell you what will be for you, v'yacharit hayamim. So the question is, what does v'yacharit hayamim mean? Acharit hayamim can be translated at the end of time. So, for example, in the book of Yeshayahu and in Micha, I believe it's the same verse. The vision of Isaiah that God's temple will be established, the world will come forward to worship God in God's temple. Right? That vision is that messianic vision of Isaiah, that it happens bi'acharit hayamim. And the question is that what Jacob's vision is about here as well? The end of days, kind of messianic vision at the end of time? Or does acharit hayamim mean something else? Here the English translation we have, JPS, here they translate in days to come, which I suspect here is probably the better translation. Because the truth of the matter is, when you look at the blessings that Jacob hands out over here, it doesn't seem to refer necessarily to the end of days. It seems to refer more properly to the future. one of the things that's very striking about the blessings that Yaakov gives his sons is that several of the blessings, he describes the portion in the land that this tribe is going to possess. It doesn't sound like an end of days vision or prophecy. It sounds like a prophecy, perhaps Acharit Hayomim, maybe it means after you leave Egypt. Yaakov knows they're stuck here for a long time. He knows that. He understands that. We'll get to that later. So he's saying, but someday you will, what he said to Joseph, someday God will return you to your land. Someday. Someday it will happen. Maybe that's what's referred to as Bi'acharit Hayomim, when you return to the land, when you capture the land, because Yaakov spoke about capturing the land from the Amori, B'charbi Uv'kashti, talked about the Amori, and of course we all know, and we've studied this, those who studied with me, we discussed this many times, that the beginning of the conquest of the land takes place in the Torah before they cross the Jordan River. The first land that's captured from the Amori, and it is actually the Amori, is Sichon and Og, Melech Amori. Sichon and Og are the kings of Amori. Sichon is explicitly Melech Amori, and Og is mentioned also as a king of Amori in the beginning of Sefer Devarim. So the beginning of the conquest of the land is from the Amori, actually. So maybe that's what's referred to as the end of later, in later times. It means when you leave Egypt, you begin to capture the land, you do capture the land. Let me tell you, when you settle the land, and that's the focus of Jacob's blessings, I believe. We don't have to jump to the Messianic times. Acharit Hayomim can mean later. It doesn't have to mean the end. You have it, for example, where Acharon means later and not the end or last. We have it when God spoke to Moshe in the land of Egypt, and Moshe was told by God to go and save the people, take them out of Egypt. And Moshe said to God, they're not going to believe me. And God gives Moshe signs. And God gives Moshe one sign is, take your stick and throw it down to the ground, turns into a snake. He said, and then there's another sign, put your hand in your bosom, it becomes leprous. And then God said to Moshe, if they won't listen to the first sign, and they won't hearken to the Acharon, the last sign, then take water, throw it to the ground, it turns into blood. So Acharon can't mean the last one, because God said, if they don't listen to the Ota Acharon, then I'll give you another sign. So Acharon doesn't mean last over there, it means later. So over here, I think we can, in that spirit, interpret as JPS translates. Doesn't prove that much that JPS translates it, but in this case, I think it is actually the better translation in days to come. And Yaakov,
excuse me,
yes,
David. There's also in the story with when Yaakov is dividing up the groups before they meet. It comes Acharonim, he says about Leah, and then Acharonim again about
that is very true. It's exactly right. There Acharonim appears more than once. So it means later over there. They can't both be last, right? So you say very well in that chapter 32, when Yaakov returns, that's 100% right. So the word Acharon, probably are other cases, I didn't look it up, but where Acharon doesn't mean the last one, but it means later. It certainly means later, and you say very well, because it's used twice. Then Leah Achronim, they would say Achronim. It has it twice over there in chapter 32. Thank you for that. Very good comment. Okay, let's continue now. Hikavzu v'shimu b'nei Yaakov v'shimu Yisrael avichem. Gather together, O sons of Jacob. Gather to Israel, your father. That's typical biblical poetry. We have the parallel. That's biblical poetry works with parallelism. B'nei Yaakov and Yisrael avichem. Fine. I'm not going to get into the parallelism of biblical Hebrew, which is a whole interesting topic in its own right. In any event, now we start with, Jacob starts with his first son. We have to see the order of the son, the order of the blessing, which is interesting, because they're not exactly in the order of birth, but it starts with birth order. The first one is Ruvain Bechoriata, Kochiv Reshit Oni, Yeter Seit, Yeter Az. Ruvain is Yaakov's firstborn, right? First, my might and first fruit of my vigor. Yeter Seit, Yeter Az. can be translated variously. The translation here is fine, certainly possible, exceeding in rank, exceeding in honor. What Yaakov says is, we know that typically one would assume that the firstborn has certain privileges. We know that Yaakov bought the Bechorah from Esav, presumably because he saw in the Bechorah some possible benefit in the future. Not at this moment. And Esav, who lives in the present, doesn't care about the Bechorah. He's angry later on that Yaakov took it from him under these conditions. But you see from that the Bechorah has some kind of privileges. Maybe Esav suspects when Yaakov steals his blessing. Maybe he then suspects that the reason he took the birthright in the first place was in order to get the blessing. I think that's possible. In any event, what Yaakov says is by right, by norm, by custom, you should be the firstborn and have the rights of the firstborn. And as we saw in the previous chapter, the firstborn gets an extra portion. But, says Yaakov, that's not happening in this case. Pachas kamayim al totar, ki alita mishkevei avicha, oz chilalta yitzui Allah. No, you are, here they translate, pachas is unstable, hasty. It's an interesting word. Pachas, nechpaz is a related word probably. Unstable as water, you shall exceed no longer. You are stripped of the additional blessing, al totar, the yeter, the extra, that you don't get. And the reason Yaakov alludes to the story back in chapter 35, where it says that Reuven, after Rachel's death, sleeps with his father's concubine Bilhah, his father's wife, concubine. Sometimes she's called the wife, sometimes she's called the concubine, but basically he sleeps with his father's wife. And when you did that, says Yaakov, chilalta yitzui Allah, you mounted my bed, so chilalta. Does it mean chilalta yourself? Does it mean chilalta God? Does it mean chilalta me? All of the above are possible. But that's what the reason Yaakov gives for this behavior, which is improper behavior, but also something that Yaakov calls pachas. It's not something which was thought through properly. You acted in a hasty manner, in an unthinking way, and therefore you can't be the leading brother because you acted in an improper way. The point I would emphasize over here is the following: that we're not going to get into. We discussed once why Reuven does that. The commentaries were divided. We talked about that. What was his motive? Probably in some sense defending his mother's honor. Okay, whatever it was, Yaakov condemns it. But the point I wanted to emphasize is that when you're looking at this verse, that Reuven is no longer the right of the firstborn. Yaakov was already given to Yosef, right in chapter 48, by the way. Here he's telling everybody what he's done. He's already done it. But the point is that it's not probably, I would presume it's not just about, or I suggest, it's not just about that particular incident. That what Yaakov is doing, the blessings that Yaakov hands out, are a function of the story of Genesis, the story of Yaakov's life. And in Reuven, in Chumash, is an interesting character because Reuven appears in two other stories, actually three other stories. But the two that I'm thinking of right now are, he's the brother who says to his own brothers, we shouldn't kill Joseph. He's the only one who says initially, the brothers are ready to kill Joseph back in chapter 37. And Reuven says, you don't kill your brother. Why should we kill our brother and the blood be on our hands? But then he makes a suggestion, let's not kill him, let's throw him into the pit. And if you throw him into a pit, and our hands should not harm him, he's our brother, right? He said, you can't kill him, right? But the point is, if you throw him into the pit, he will die. Now, Reuven is thinking, when no one's looking, I'm going to come back to the pit, pull him out of the pit, and return to his father. That's what Reuven thinks. The Torah tells us this. But he doesn't say that to the brothers. To the brothers, he says, listen, there's a difference between killing with your own hands, we shouldn't do that, and throwing him into a pit, causing his death. Now, of course, his intention is to save Joseph. But the very fact that he suggests such an argument means that in his head, somehow, that's a valid argument. That's a valid distinction. I don't think that the Chumash thinks that's much of a distinction. And in fact, when Yehuda speaks and they see the caravan in the desert, Yehuda says, listen, why should we kill our brother? Yehuda doesn't say we're not really killing him. We are killing him. But we shouldn't kill him. He's our brother. Let's sell him instead. So in that story, you see something about, on one hand, Reuven is the one brother who actually wants to save Joseph, wants to save him, not to sell him. That's positive. On the other hand, his leadership abilities are not the greatest. He might, if he really could have stood up and said, listen, I'm the oldest, we don't kill brothers. You don't like him, I don't like him. He doesn't say that. That's number one. And number two, you see the same kind of leadership failing when the brothers returned from Egypt the first time with their sacks of food, and unbeknownst to themselves, there's also their money has been returned. And they open up the sacks, and Shimon has been taken hostage back in Egypt. And the brothers come back, and they open up their sacks, and there's all the money, and Shimon is missing. And Yaakov says, what is this? Yaakov presumably suspects that the money, they have a missing brother and they have a lot of money. And they say to Yaakov, we have to bring Binyamin down to Egypt. And Yaakov says, he's not going with you. Yosef is missing, Shimon is missing. What, you want to take Binyamin too? He does suspect them, it would appear. And Reuven speaks up. Says Reuven to his father, father, send the boy with me. If I can't bring him back, you can kill my two children. So apart from the fact that, why would Yaakov want to kill his two grandchildren? That's a very good question. Rashi says, Bechar Shota, who said that this son is a fool. But apart from being a fool, there's something else. If you want to be a hero, don't say you can kill my two children. You want to be a hero, say what Judah says. If I don't bring him back, I am responsible. That's the first step of any kind of leader who says, I'm responsible. Any leader who says, I'm not responsible isn't much of a leader. I don't want to get into current events, but anyway, what does that even mean? So Yehud is a leader. Reuven is well-intentioned. He's the one who wants to, he says, look, I'll send the boy with me. But then he just says the wrong thing. You can kill my sons. No. He could have said, I'm responsible, whatever that means. As Judah says, I'll be accounted a sinner all of my days. So Reuven, on one hand, my point of this verse is, yes, Yaakov does mention specifically the incident with Bilhah. But I don't think we readers, reading a set of blessings at the end of this book, should not presume that the Chumash is limited, that Yaakov limits it to that particular event. And that's, I think, a much bigger question that emerges in the study of Chumash. For example, I'll give you a different example, but it's similar. Sometimes the Chumash says, so-and-so had a child, and she or he named the child X, and gives a reason for the name. But we should not assume that that's the only reason for the name. The fact that someone has a certain name, and the Chumash says named X because of this reason, does not mean typically that that's the only reason. That's the reason that's given in that verse. Maybe it's the primary reason, but there can be other reasons. For example, I'll give you one example. There are multiple examples. Adam and Eve have two children, Cain and Hevel, and then they have a third child whose name is Shet, and named Shet by his mother, by Eve. For she said, right, Shatri Elohim, God has given me, Lashit is to give, or to place. We had it with Jacob. He placed his hands, Yashit, Yodo al Rosh of Ephraim. But the word Shet has another meaning, actually. Tashtit, Shatot. In biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew, Tashtit is a foundation. Shet is the one son who's the foundation of the world. His son is named Enosh, and he's the one that's going to survive the flood. He is the foundation of the world. So the word Shet means foundation. That's not the reason that Eve gives for the name. She has it in terms of God has gifted me. But we, the reader, understand that Shet has other meanings as well. My point is just an example of something that's, I think, very important. We shouldn't assume that Yaakov's removing the birth, the Bechorah from Reuven is only because of this. there's an image of Reuven that emerges from the book. And by the way, the same thing is true of the blessings that Moshe gives in Zota Bracha. When you read those blessings given to the tribes, one of the factors has to be the story of that tribe in terms of the biblical narrative. So, for example, we mentioned earlier that Shimon is not mentioned in Zota Bracha. He's alluded to, but not mentioned. There's no blessing given directly to Shimon. Now, why would Moshe not give a blessing to Shimon? Because Shimon was the main culprit in the great sin of the second generation, and that is the sin of Baal Pa'ar, called the sequel to the Egel, the idolatry of Baal Pa'ar. The ringleader is the Shevet Shimon. So that is a very negative mark on the tribe of Shimon, and Shimon is not mentioned as having a direct blessing. So we always have to look at the larger narrative, especially at blessings that appear at the end of the book. Okay, now that's as far as Reuven is concerned. Let's get to the next one now. Now we have the next two sons of Yaakov in order. Shimon v'Levi Achim Kulei Chamat Mecherotehem. Okay, so first of all, Shimon v'Levi Achim, Shimon and Levi are brothers, or one might say they're all brothers. But what Yaakov has in mind is these are brothers who act in concert, and already in the first verse, we anticipate what comes next, because in the story of Shechem, they acted together. Shimon and Levi took their swords, having tricked the people of Shechem, and they massacred the town, and they saved their sister. So they are Achim. They work together. And what Yaakov is hinting at, he says it explicitly later on, there's some people that in and of themselves, it might be okay. But when they get together, they're trouble. And that's Shimon and Levi. Shimon and Levi are brothers, but Klei Chamas Mecherotehem, that's a difficult verse. Klei Chamas. Chamas, of course, is a very negative word. It actually means wickedness. They're vessels. The question is, what does Mecherotehem mean? Big mystery. Mecherotehem, they translate here as weapons. It's one possibility. Mecherotehem, Rashi cites it, refers elsewhere in the Bible to one's birthplace and one's upbringing. And maybe it means their basic nature. These are two people who by nature can be violent.
Rabbi Silber,
Yes.
Hamas and Unkelos around Sarah time is Din. Hamas, it says Din in Unkelos.
Din, I have to check that.
Yeah, it's an Unkelos, yeah. Okay.
I'll have to look at it after. I don't have it in front of me. I'll take a look. But the Klei Chamas Mecherotehem, it means that by their nature. By the way, this is true of Shimon and also true of Levi. So they're blessed together. It's actually very striking. There's one blessing, if you want to call it a blessing, together. And let's not forget that what the hero of the last 4 books of the Torah, if you had to pick out one hero, it's got to be Moshe Rabbeinu. And one of the first things Moshe does, Moshe's a Levi. And the thing that Moshe does that sets him off on a path which changes his life and the life of the people, he sees the Egyptian beating up on a Jew, and he intervenes and he actually kills the Egyptian and buries him. So Moshe, that's the first thing Moshe does, and he has to run away and all that, and that's a Levi. But something changed in the course of the Torah, in the course of the Bible, something changes. But over here, what Yaakov says is, these are two people, when they're together, their weapons, Klei Chamas, are in fact violence or wickedness or whatever. And therefore, that's the first thing he says. He doesn't pull any punches over here. The next is, B'sodam al tavo nafshi, b'kolam al techad kvodi, ki bi'apam hargu ish, v'virtzanam ikvushar. And here he says something very interesting. Sod means in the Chumash typically council, people coming together. Kahal is when people come together. What Yaakov is saying what he's emphasizing over here in the first half of this verse, in their council, I'm not involved. In their decisions, I'm not included. In other words, what Yaakov seems to be saying over here is that in the story of the violence of Shimon and Levi, which is the story of Shechem, That's the story where explicitly the Torah says they took their swords and they matched it to the people, having tricked them. Says Yaakov, I want you to understand something. He's talking to all his sons, not just to Shimon and Levi. I wasn't involved in that decision. That wasn't me. That's not my way. That's what Yaakov is saying over here. In that council, in that assembly, I was not involved. I would never have done such a thing. Ki bi'apam harguish, when they get angry, they kill. Over tzanam ikvushar, and that when they are desired to do so, they maim an ox. I saw that some commentaries say, well, it never says that in this. It never says that in the story of Shechem they maimed the oxen. It says they took the oxen, they took the spoils. But I think that when it comes to poetry, you don't have to be that literal. And they have maimed oxen as well. Elsewhere in the Bible, we have maiming oxen, but I don't think we have to be so literal. His point is is to emphasize the violence and the danger of violence, and that's not his path. And therefore, he's going to help them out. He's going to try to help them. And how is he going to help them? That's the next verse. It says Yaakov, next verse. Orura pam kiyaz v'yavratam ki kashata, achalkem b'Yaakov v'afitzem b'Yisrael. Says, cursed is their anger, which is very fierce. He doesn't curse them. That we know. He doesn't curse any of his children, but he curses the anger. Orura pam, and evratam is also anger. It's very powerful. Kashata, az, it's powerful. And my solution, says Jacob, is achalkem b'Yaakov v'afitzem b'Yisrael. I will divide them amongst Jacob. I will scatter them in Israel. Now, how are they scattered? So we understand that Levi is scattered. Levi has no land. Levi is given land by the other tribes. There are 42 cities, 48 altogether, 42 plus 6. These cities of the Levium are 42 cities, and also cities of refuge, which is also very striking. The cities of refuge to stop violence. The cities of refuge are set up to stop the violence, to prevent violence from spiraling out of control. Those cities of refuge, Arei Miklat, are cities of the Levium. So the Levium don't have their own cities. They have cities, but they're given by other tribes, and they're not in any one place. They're scattered through all the tribes. So they are Achalkem b'Yaakov v'afitzem b'Yisrael. That's as far as Levi is concerned. Now, what about as far as Shimon is concerned? So as far as Shimon is concerned, we come back to what I mentioned earlier, that when Moshe blesses the tribes, it's very striking. There's no blessing to the tribe of Shimon. The tribe of Shimon, later in the Bible, actually, it would appear that the tribe of Shimon becomes incorporated into the tribe of Judah. Shimon and Judah are related, so Shimon is sort of subservient to Judah, not connected to Levi, but connected to Yehuda as secondary to Yehuda. That would appear to be, that is clearly what happens in the Torah later. And actually, when you look at the Zot HaBracha, to the blessing that Moshe gives Yehuda, it's very striking how it starts. Yehuda Amar, Shema Hashem Kol Yehuda. Oh God, Shema Hashem. God, hear the cry of Judah. So the first word is Shema Hashem Kol Yehuda, and many years ago I suggested that Shema Hashem Kol Yehuda, that the Shema is a reference to Shimon. And then I discovered later that some of the Mefarshim actually suggest this. I remember where I saw it, but it's was suggested already before my suggestion. And I think there is a sense over there that Shimon doesn't have their own place, and Levi is scattered about. And the story in which Shimon and Levi are separated forever, which is a critical story of the Torah, of course, is the story that I alluded to before, namely the story of Baal Pa'ar. When Israel, after Bilam blesses them, and they're in the desert, and Israel gets involved with the daughters of Moab, and the god of Moab, which is Pa'ar. And the ringleader of the Israelites in the worship of Pa'ar is the head of the tribe of Shimon, named Zimri. And in that story, Moshe tells the judges to find the people, to punish the people, whatever. And then someone stands up from amongst the congregation. His name is Pinchas. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, he goes and he kills Zimri and he kills Cosby, the woman, and the plague is stopped. And Pinchas, of course, is from the tribe of Levi. He's a Kohen. He's from the tribe of Levi. And he stops the plague by killing the head of the tribe of Shimon. So that story over there, which is of immense significance for other reasons, but there you have the story in which Shimon and Levi are fully separated to the degree that Levi actually kills Shimon. And after Levi kills Shimon, God blesses Pinchas. I give Pinchas my covenant of peace. So from that point on, the Kohanim are not warriors. They're not warriors. We'll come to this later in the chapter, not today, but we'll come to this later in the chapter. That the Kohanim are not warriors, but that's the last time we have the Kohen, which is Pinchas, killing, and he kills Shimon. So that's the blessing that Yaakov gives to Shimon and Levi. Blessing in this sense, what Yaakov is saying in effect is, all my sons have to be included. I have to find a way to include them. When they're together, they're dangerous. So they can't be together. They're both part of the nation, and I'll find a way to include them both. But in order to include them both, this sense of the achva, the sense of brotherliness in that sense, that can't work for them and can't work for me. So therefore, I can't be part of that. Therefore, we have to separate them. Levi goes one way and Shimon goes the other way. Okay, those are the first three sons of Jacob. And now we come to son number 4. Before we come to son number 4, there are two sons of Jacob who get the big blessings in this chapter. One is Yehuda and the other is Yosef. That's not a surprise. And we'll come to Yehuda's blessing soon. But before I continue, anybody have any comments or questions at this point?
Rabbi,
Yes.
is Birtonamiku Shor, is there any possibility that Shor could refer to Yosef? That
Yes, I would have that in mind too. Yes, even though over here it's not clear, but later in Zota Bracha, Joseph is called the Shor. So certainly that is very possible that there is a, I mean, it's hard to know with poetry what the allusions are. There may be 100 allusions here, but I actually had in mind to say it. Thank you for mentioning that in Zota Bracha, when Moshe blesses Yosef with a big blessing, let's see, B'chor Shoro Hadarlo, V'karnei Re'im Karnav. So Moshe says about the tribe of Joseph, B'chor Shoro, that he calls Joseph the shore, the ox, that the B'chor Shoro Hadarlo. Let's see how they translate B'chor Shoro. It's an interesting question. Let's see now. Here they translate. Let's see what it's saying. Here they translate like a firstling, like an ox. That's a bechor. That's what they translate. A firstling bull in His Majesty. And it's interesting about the Yosef being a shor, is that Moshe carries the metaphor further. He's a shore that has horns that gores nations, but he has two horns. One is the horn of Menashe, and one is the horn of Ephraim.
maybe he calls him Bechor because Yaakov designated him as the Bechor. Maybe he calls him the Bechor because Yaakov had designated.
Right, no, for sure, right. That's another good point, right. That Yosef, in a sense, is the Bechor. And he mentions Menashe and Ephraim. Yaakov doesn't mention Menashe and Ephraim in chapter 49. But Moshe mentions Joseph as having two tribes. So in that sense, he's the Bechor. And yes, and Joseph is called the Shor. In general, that's another, we'll get to this maybe next time we discuss the Chumash, which is in 2 weeks. I'll mention about next week is different, but yes, but many of the tribes are related to different animals. I think about 5 of them. Now Joseph here is, we'll see about Joseph, but there's Naphtali, Ayala, Shlucha, Gura, Yehuda. So the animals are mentioned in several of the tribes are described as being certain kind of animals. So yes, your point is well taken. Even though here Joseph is not called a shor, but elsewhere he is referred to a shor in the other blessing, the parallel blessing at the end of the Chumash. Is there anybody else who wants to comment before we start with Judah? All right, let's
Does
then.
does he feel obligated to sort of create some of these brachot, like in response to the way that he and his brother were treated? Is that why he's so willing to try to like bless the sons that he thinks are problematic, but do so in a way that's more diplomatic?
I don't know. It's hard to psychoanalyze him. I don't know. I know what one thing is clear though. He said early on he wants to find a way. That's maybe one of the major themes of the book. He wants to find a way to include everyone. And in order to include everyone, there are different ways to do that. With Joseph, he had one mechanism to do it through his children. With Shimon and Levi, the mechanism is to separate them, and they both can be included. They can't be together. So I would say that his dream was, his commitment was to build this kind of a bayit, to build this kind of an inclusive family where everybody's different, but somehow we find a way to work together, which we know is not a simple matter. But that's what Yaakov is doing. And till Yaakov comes along, no one has ever done it. So maybe what's driving Yaakov could be his own relationship to his brother, or maybe even he knows what happened with Yitzchak and with his father, Yitzchak and Ishmael, that they got along in some sense, but one is the covenantal blessing and one doesn't. One's inside the land, one is outside the land. Same with Yaakov and Esau. So again, it's hard to know beyond that. The Chumash often, typically doesn't give us a kind of the inner thinking. It rarely gives us the inner thinking of the people. So it's up to us to figure out, reading the text from a literary perspective, what he might have been thinking. But we have to be careful with that, I think. In any event, but certainly his mission here is of inclusion. And let me just start and have one announcement to make. Let's start at least with Judah. Start with him. Judah is one of the two main sons of Jacob who gets the primary blessing. I'll start with the first few words. Yehuda, ata yoducha achecha. Judah, ata yoducha achecha. You are your brother's yoducha. Now the word yoducha can mean different things. The word lahodot, modim anachnu lach, we say in our prayers. Lahodot can mean to thank. Todah, to thank. Lahodot can mean to praise, right? Often means to praise in the Psalms. Or lahodot can mean to acknowledge, like hitvadot, vidu is confession, acknowledgement. All three are possible. If I had to personally choose which one to interpret over here, I would favor acknowledge. And here the point is, I'll end today with this point about Judah. There are two great sons, most talented sons of Yaakov. The most talented one, obviously, is Joseph. He's just brilliant, talented. But at the end of the day, what's very striking is, and Jacob loves Joseph, that's clear. Maybe he's told he's his favorite. Favorite or not, at the end of the day, when Yaakov chooses a leader of the tribes, it's very striking. He doesn't choose Joseph. He chooses Judah. And we can discuss next time we discuss the Chumash, which is in 2 weeks. We will talk about why it is that he chooses Judah and not Joseph. But in point of fact, you see something about Yaakov over here. He's able to put aside his emotions, as it were, and make the best decision for the family. And the best decision is that Judah should be the king. And one of the reasons is the Atoyo Ducha Achecha. Judah is a person that other people can actually accept. Joseph is not someone that the brothers can ever fully accept. And you can give several reasons for it. But one of them, I think, could be very simply, Joseph is a person they don't really fully understand. Joseph has a different way to see the world, as he makes it very clear. He just sees things differently. And people can't actually relate to that. Joseph can say to the brothers, and he means it. Listen, I'm not angry that you sold me into slavery, almost got me killed. This was God's plan. And you say to yourself, what? Why does that matter? And for most people, it wouldn't matter. But for Joseph, it actually does matter. That's how he sees himself. I am God's agent. This is God's plan. Okay. You meant harm, but it doesn't matter because it's God's plan. And that's a person that's very hard to understand. We can't understand someone you can't really accept him as your leader. So Yehuda Ata Yoducha Achecha, praise, thank, acknowledge. I would say acknowledgement is very central, and as we'll see next time, Yehuda is the one who was given the blessing of kingship, and not Joseph, and that's very clear, and we'll talk about that a bit. Let me just say what's going on. So next week, doesn't happens very infrequently, but next week there's a special event that Trisha is involved in, which is it's the 20th yard site of Rivka Rosenwein, we have a whole Mishnah project we started years ago, and we've developed it, Mishnah Yomit, and next week there's a yard site, and I'm speaking at 10 o'clock next Sunday. Everybody can join with Zoom. I'll talk about Mishnah, and I'll talk somewhat about the Chumash as well, but it won't be about Sefer Bereshit. Everybody is invited, and we'll continue with the Chumash class in 2 weeks. So everybody will be invited to join with Zoom. It's going to be in Teaneck, in the synagogue in Teaneck, United Israel. It's a big event. Program will start at 9. I will be speaking at 10. You're welcome to join for more of the program, I presume. And it's launching this great Mishnah project, which I encourage everybody to get involved in. The study of Mishnah, which is really the gateway to Torah Shebaal Peh. So that's next week. And then we resume the normal class in 2 weeks. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Silber, and thank you everyone for joining us and being part of our learning community. You can find the registration for the event Rabbi Silber was telling us about and all our other classes this fall Zman at 5784.drisha.org/fall. So looking forward to seeing you at this Mishnah event next week, and then for the continuation of this class the week after.
Yes, and by the way, today at 1 o'clock, I've taken on the first track day that we're starting with, which is Yevamot. So those who are learning Yevamot, there's a 1 o'clock every week. There'll be a 1 hour shiur to sort of keep pace with the Mishnah, which I took on the responsibility for the first track day. Yevamot, that's at 1 o'clock today. Everybody's welcome to join and to get involved in the study of Mishnah, which is, as I said, really the gateway to Torah Shebaal Peh. Outside of the Bible, it's the most important book the Jewish people ever had. It really opens up the whole other world. It's not easy. I mean, it doesn't take as much time as Daf Yomi or anything like that. It can be done in much less time. You get out of it what you put into it, but it is really you get to see the big picture about the whole rabbinic tradition and Torah Shebaal Peh. I encourage everybody to do it. It's a great opportunity to have set times to learn and to study something that for many people is completely new. Okay.
Will we
Thank you.
Will we get the invitation with the email if we are registered for this class?
You can find the registration on the website, so you won't automatically get the link if you're registered for this class. So to join the Yevamot class, I'll put the link here into your web browser, and you can register for all Drisha's classes this fall Zman by that link. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Thank you.
Great.